with this money that your grandfather left.
Right.
I have basically one preliminary question for you, and then we'll get into what I've discovered in the law, okay?
Okay.
When your grandfather died, did he have a will?
No.
He did not.
Did not have a will.
Did not have a will. Okay. What I've done is I have looked at the law of intestacy, which is the law that's rendered when somebody passes away without a will. Okay? So, what the law says in regards to that, and I'm going to kind of read this to you because this is the law in the state of Oklahoma, is if any person having title to any estate not otherwise limited by any antenuptial or after marriage agreement, contract dies without disposing of the estate by will, such estate descends and shall be distributed in the following manner. Okay? If the decedent leaves a surviving spouse, the share of the estate passing to said spouse is, and the relevant portion of the law is D, if there are surviving issues, so surviving children, surviving parents, that kind of stuff. And you said you are the only child.
Right.
Was your father the only child of your grandfather?
Yeah.
Okay. If there are surviving issue, one or more of whom are not also issue of the surviving spouse, and your father's wife was not your mother, correct?
Correct.
Okay. One, an undivided one-half interest in the property acquired by the joint industry of the husband and wife during coverture while they lived together. And this is by them working together. So at the time of your grandfather's death, your grandmother would have inherited one half interest in the joint or the property that was joint industry. Where they worked together their whole lives. Does your grandmother stay at home?
My grandmother is in the hospital in a nursing care facility.
Right. But when she was working, or in working age, was she just raising your father?
No, she was a homemaker. Yeah.
Okay. And so you said your grandfather was a physician. Right. And so he acquired this property. Right. So in that situation, that is joint industry property. Okay. And an undivided equal part in the property of the decedent not acquired by the joint industry of the husband and wife during coverture with each of the living children of the decedent and the lawful issue of any deceased child by right of representation. So there wasn't any deceased children. Your father was alive at the time of your grandfather's death. Mm-hmm. So essentially what the law says is that she would have acquired one half interest and your father would have acquired a one half interest in the property that was left because there was no will of your grandfather. So, divide that in half at the time of his death. Your father would have been deemed one half interest and your grandmother would have been deemed one half interest at the time. Okay. Now your father became power of attorney over your grandmother's interest. And the bank accounts in this situation and the certificate of deposits are all in your father's name. However, he was power of attorney, so a lot of that property remained your grandmother's at that time as well. Okay. So when your father died, then again he would have had that one half interest, and again he didn't have a will. So that one half interest that he had would have been passed one half to his wife at the time, and then the other half would have been passed on to you. Okay. So that's most likely the scenario based on the law that would happen at the time. So one of your questions, will there be money left over to take care of your grandmother? I think there's absolutely yes. That's going to be the answer. We're going to have to find any bank records or that kind of stuff showing from the time of your grandfather's death how much money was there and see how it was divided, and then part of that's going to be your grandmother's, and he would have been controlling that through the power of attorney. Then his half interest he could have spent or whatever he did at that time. so really, what his wife would be entitled to is 1/2 of his leftover interest. And so 1/2 of that would go to her, and 1/2 of that would go to you, according to the law of intestacy. Okay. The one thing, the key phrase that I like to look at here when it says an undivided 1/2 interest in property acquired by the joint industry of the husband and wife during coverture, that's kind of debatable, because this money that was left over, I mean, unless there's a retirement we don't know about or something to that effect, there is no property of joint industry. So there may be a way to say, hey, that's not, property of 1/2 of a joint industry. However, coming down to the second part of the law again, an undivided equal part in the property of this decedent not acquired by joint industry. So we may win or lose there,
Okay.
So the bottom line is you're going to get some money. 1/2 of your father's property is going to go to you. 1/2 is going to go to her. However, the property of your grandmother's is most likely not going to go to her.
Okay.
It's going to be still watched over by whoever would be controlling that. So the next thing we had discussed is you becoming the legal representative of the estate.
Right.
Okay? Now the law sets this out pretty clearly. Basically, the number one person in an estate after someone has died is their surviving spouse. The second person in line is a surviving child. Okay? So, she's number one, but that doesn't mean that she would win and become the personal representative, and we can certainly fight that and give legitimate reasons why she should not be entitled, or she should not be in charge of how the estate is divided.
Right.
For fear that she's going to take some of your grandmother's money and use it for her own purpose, which she's not entitled to.
Right.
So we're going to have to look at some of the history of the spending in those accounts from the time that your father acquired them. We're going to have to look at what the court decided in the first case about how much property went to who, and then kind of figure out what's left over.
Right.
What's your grandmother's, what was your father's, and then your father's interest will be divided. And again, we will argue that, she shouldn't be entitled to this because, she had no help in earning this money. But, like I said, the law is fairly clear that 1/2 interest would go. So, what I'm kind of seeing is maybe 3/4 of these funds that are left over in these properties might be awarded 1/4 to, or 1/2 to you of your father's, and then your grandmother's would remain hers. But somebody's going to have to oversee those.
Right.
Okay. In the medical records, your mother or your grandmother's had some recent health problems, I understand.
Right.
And she was evaluated not only for physical ailments, but also for psychological ailments as well. What we want to do is, if she's capable, to obtain her consent and try to get a report or any medical records from her psychiatrist, especially to see if she is legally competent to make a decision over her funds.
Right.
And if she's not, there's some things we can do. Also, we want to look at that power of attorney, get her side of the story if she's competent to tell it and all that other stuff, to see if your father may have, forced her into granting that power of attorney so he would have access to her funds.
Right.
Okay? So, those are things that we're going to want to look at and try to ascertain to see what we need to do next. Beyond that, if your grandmother is not of competent mind, we will take that information, and I think we should apply for you to be her guardian.
Right.
As her guardian, you will have legal control of her funds. So that would essentially entitle you to whatever that 1/2 interest is. You would have that, and you'd be over that, on top of your half interest in what your father left. So I'm guessing there's about 3/4 again of that money that you could be in control of.
Yeah.
So we need to get your grandmother's consent if possible, and if she's not possible, then maybe we can talk to the psychiatrist anyway, or get a court order. Trying to grant or trying to get those medical records. We can do that through a subpoena and determine that. Okay. Also, once we get this information together, this is all stuff that we will present at the upcoming hearing here in a couple weeks, and try to dispute, her becoming the personal representative of the estate, and put you in charge of that instead, especially based on the commingling of the funds, so that we can get that straightened out to see who deserves what. And I think we could be in the position to figure out exactly, what the fair value is of the estate at this time, and what should be your grandmother's, what should be your father's, and then what should be yours and your his widow. Okay. So those are kind of the next steps that I'm looking at. Once we get that information, we can actually file a motion for emergency guardianship over your grandmother, and then if that's not contested, that becomes permanent. After you can get that right away, usually because of the fear of the money loss and all that kind of stuff. There'll be a hearing after that. Hearing's usually done within about 10 days. We could subpoena the psychiatrist to come up and testify to her competency, right. And then unless that's contested, then you would become her legal guardian. And we can also present evidence if it is contested by his wife that she didn't take care of her, she didn't provide her with monies and all that kind of stuff up to this point in time,
right.
And that you would be a much stronger guardian than she would.
Okay.
So I think those are the steps that we need to take even in the interim, and they may combine those two together. A lot of times the courts that's dealing with one issue would deal with both. Okay. So they may do the guardianship hearing at the same time that they do this other one. Or they may extend this hearing out so that we have time to get this guardianship done.
Right.
Okay. Based on that information, did you have questions for me today?
No, you pretty much cleared up what I was thinking. I didn't know there not being a will, I didn't know all that information. That's good. So what's the next step to be taken? You have to go file for the emergency guardianship?
We're gonna file right away. I'll try to file it tomorrow, an order for temporary guardian or temporary emergency guardianship. Will appear before the court. A lot of times the court will do that just as they can get it in. We'll just try to go see a judge tomorrow and try to get that emergency guardianship taken care of. It'll give you emergency guardianship over the funds, and then or over your grandmother's estate, and then they'll set a hearing for that guardianship issue.
Okay.
The only issue we'll really overcome is that your father titled all the funds into his name, but I think when we can prove the going from your grandfather when he died and what should have happened and all that kind of stuff, we can trace that money down and those items down to where we'll be able to figure out what should have been done with them in the first place and make sure it's done at this time.
Okay.
That's what we'll be fighting for. So I think your case has a good chance of succeeding, and we have a good chance of getting a large amount of those funds for you to take care of your grandmother.
Yeah, well, I know my stepmother, she wants the power of attorney over all that stuff, but it's I just want to make sure my grandmother's taken care of, because I don't think she would do that. I mean, my dad didn't do that. She stuck her in a nursing home and
well, we can definitely see how well she was taken care of. We can get with the nursing home to find out did they supply her with clothing items and the things that she needs while she was in there, if they paid for it on time, those kind of things. Were they taking care of her? And if they were, was it your father or was it your stepmother? And if your stepmother really didn't have anything to do with it, she didn't visit